Hi, this is Chantel, and you're listening to the Brand Warrior Revolution podcast. And today I am so excited. My skin literally wants to peel off because I have got Dr. Janina Scarlet in the house, and I have great admiration for the work that she does. And I cannot wait to share for her to share her story with you. And as you know, this podcast is about stories that can change people. And we know that this world that we live in has various challenges. And I'm just rounding up as many people with amazing stories so that we can become this tribe of superheroes that'll change this world for the better. So, Dr. Janina, I am just overjoyed that you said yes to come and grace my audience with your presence and tell us your story. So, I'm going to dive right in and ask you just to tell us your origin story.
Oh, Chantel, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor. I'm really excited. And yeah, I think we all have an origin story, every single person. And my origin story began in Ukraine. So I was born and raised in Ukraine. And right before my third birthday, there was a massive explosion at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, and everyone in Ukraine and the nearing countries was affected. And so, what that meant for me was spending most of my childhood in and out of the hospital, being very ill, not knowing if I would make it to adulthood. And some of the side effects still persist to this day. So, whenever the weather changes, I go through severe migraines, which sometimes lead to seizures. And when we moved to United States, I was 12, and I imagine some of our listeners probably remember what it's like being 12. And I usually say that we need to start like I survived adolescence, support group. And it was rough, I know a lot of kids are bullied at that age, and I was too. But more than anything, no one talked about mental health in my school at that time. And so I mistakenly thought I was the only one struggling with depression and anxiety and having trauma symptoms. I didn't know what any of those things were. I just knew that I was really struggling. And I thought that there was something wrong with me. I saw other kids laughing, having a good time, and I felt very, very alone. And then when I was 16 years old, I went to the movies and I saw a movie that changed my life forever, and it was the X-Men. I didn't really expect anything, and when I saw it, from the moment the movie started, I felt like it was written for me. But the truth is, it was written for everyone. And the movie is about this group of mutants, right? This group of individuals who all have some kind of a genetic mutation, but they're bullied and ostracized and targeted because of their differences. They all feel incredibly alone. And then they merge to form this group called the X-Men to help people. And as I'm watching it, I have tears running down my cheeks because I I can relate to every single one of them. And then I meet Storm, played by Halle Berry, the very first Storm, and she has this ability to control the weather. Now, my whole life, I felt like the weather controlled me, and I
Wow.
see her and exactly, and I was just like, whoa, that's amazing. And just somehow seeing her made me rethink my origin story. So for the first time, I said to myself, maybe I'm not a victim, right? Like maybe I'm a survivor and maybe I have almost like a superpower where, like Storm, maybe I can't control the weather, but I can feel it in my body. So maybe it means that I have this very special connection with the earth. And so it just allowed me to rethink it. I'm getting choked up just thinking about it. And and then as I started looking around me, I noticed that every single person that I could see anyway in a completely sold out movie theater was crying when I was crying and laughing when I was crying, when I was laughing. And and so what that meant to me is that every single person could relate to the characters. And I said, but wait a minute, not everybody was exposed to Chernobyl radiation. Not everybody knew what it's like to be a mutant. And I realized that every single person in that movie theater, and the movie did really well, so really millions and millions of people that saw this movie knew what it was like to feel alone. And if the movie was made and if it did well, it means that a lot of people know what it's like to be alone. And maybe we're not different in being alone, but maybe it's in that aloneness that we're all the same. And it changed my life. And so it was because of this movie that I decided to go into psychology. And now I use stories like the X-Men, like Avengers, like Batman, like Harry Potter to help people to learn that what happens to them is just their origin story. It's the beginning, but the rest of our journey is up to us. And my purpose is to help people to learn how to become their own version of a superhero in real life.
Oh, I'm like you've taken my breath away. And I think, as you said, it's such a universal story.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, you know, are we born superheroes and then something happens and then we almost unsuperheroed throughout, whatever hurts us, whatever gets to us, and then, as you said, we've got to start the search again for the superhero in us, because I look at children when they're young, and they believe they can do anything, and they've got their imagination is so unlimited. So yeah, just talk to me a little bit about that messy bit in the middle, because you talk to a lot of people, and you see a lot of people in your work. What happens there in the middle?
I think that it's not the trauma, it's the way that people around us react to mental health. Because I think that trauma is a part of life. We all experience trauma. We all experience mental health challenges. Every single one of us has felt anxious, depressed, lonely, right? But I think that at the very least in the Western world, the way that mental health is perceived is if you're struggling, take a pill. If you're still struggling, well, there's something wrong with you and figure it out. But it's a lie. It's a lie
Yeah.
that we tell to fool ourselves. And you're right. I think everyone is born a superhero. And I think where the story changes is not from the painful experiences we go through, but the way that we're taught we have to process them. We're taught that, well, look at the positive. We're taught to say, well, kind of just figure it out, fit in the box, go on this path that's been pre-designed for you. But if you look at children, they're idealistic in the most beautiful way, right? They say, well, but if something happened to somebody, shouldn't we help? Right? And a lot of times the adults kind of stop and think, you're right, we should help. And so I think that if we're allowed to keep that childlike wonder, and if we're allowed to remember that that sense of being special and being different isn't an illusion, that's actually our truth, and that we can follow our heart in this way even if it means taking a different path, that I think actually we'll see a very different outcome in the way people respond to each other. And if when somebody's suffering people band together like the X-Men did and support each other, I think we're going to have a very different society. I think that the reason why we have such a pandemic of mental health around the world isn't because of the COVID pandemic. I think it's because people are very lonely and then they're punished for being lonely. They're told there's something wrong with you if you're feeling lonely.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I look at all the messages that I've gotten throughout my life, whenever I'm going through a struggle, put on your big girl pants, sickness is weakness, in our family, we problem solvers, we don't ponder. And I think, as a society, some of that has become just, an epidemic,
Yeah,
where
yeah,
I look at, we work a lot in the corporate space. If I look at, people that are, they've got good hearts and good souls, but they just on autopilot. They've just disconnected completely. And, I'd like to get your thoughts on, COVID has probably, you know, injected some trauma into all of our lives to a certain extent. It feels to me like, the underlying fault lines in our society has become very exposed through this. Lonely people have become lonelier. Corporate cultures that are toxic have almost become, it's as if a veil has been lifted. And, weirdly, we're walking around with masks, and we did walk around with masks before, but they just weren't seen. Now the masks are visible, the fault lines are visible, the cracks are showing.
Mhm.
What's your view?
It's complicated, isn't it? Because I think for some people, you're right. For a lot of people, it's exacerbated some of those symptoms and, yes, lifted the veil. And I think we're becoming a lot more aware of how loneliness plays a factor in our mental health more than just about any other factor. And also in terms of how certain groups, like whether we're a part of fandom or a part of a sports team or a part of, like maybe we play video games together, are not only helpful but necessary for our survival, right? Like hundreds and hundreds of years ago, we used to belong to groups, we used to belong to tribes for survival, right? If you weren't a part of a group, you would starve or you would get eaten by a lion.
Yeah.
Now, we don't physically need other people per se, right? For many of us, we might be able to survive physically for a little bit anyway without other people. But the truth is, we can't survive for too long. And the reason why is because our body, not only psychologically but physiologically, still relies on connection. When we're around people that we care about, this could be our family and friends. This could be our fandom. This could be a video game that we play with people on opposite ends of the world, but we play every day and we catch up with those people. Our bodies release this magic chemical called oxytocin. This chemical not only helps to lift our mood, but it actually strengthens our immune health and our heart. Some of the recent studies are finding that the effects of loneliness are just as damaging on our health as the effects of chronic smoking or chronic drinking. Now, they don't affect our lungs or liver in the same way, but they shorten our lifespan and affect our immune health and our heart health in the same way.
Oh my gosh, that is frightening.
It is, but the opposite is true too.
Yeah.
When we have when we have meaningful support groups, the effects of that are amazing in that our immune health gets better. Not only our emotional health gets better, but our immune health gets better. And the really interesting thing, at the end of our DNA, we have these little tails that are called telomeres. The more they replicate, the more they shrink, right? They get shorter and shorter and shorter. And it is said that the tail ends of the DNA, the telomeres, kind of predict how much life we have left, right? That we can almost like approximate it. Well, what we know is that traumatic life events like going through cancer, losing a loved one, shrink our telomeres faster, as does loneliness. But what's interesting, what we just learned like maybe a few years ago, is that meditation, yoga, and having a supportive group of friends can not just reduce the shrinkage of the telomeres, but can increase it by as much as 10% in a 5-year period, suggesting that we might be able to not only slow down the degeneration of our bodies, but increase our lifespan through yoga, meditation, and meaningful social interactions. So it is literally life-saving. And so that's why I have that caveat that in some ways we don't physically need other people, but we do. Our life depends on it.
Sure. A few months back, I read somewhere that you get healthier if you hug someone for 30 seconds. And I
Yes.
started hugging my 3 kids and my husband for 30 seconds each a day. And I've got a teenage son of 16. I can tell you, it takes it takes a lot for him not to have like rumblings and unhappiness about this. But I mean, now that I'm listening to you, like it does make sense. And I mean, one of the things, Janina, that we really struggling with is, my team of facilitators. We spend, sometimes 8 hours a day on Zoom, and sometimes we work with groups where the cameras are off. And
Yes.
and and we internally we have a cameras on culture if someone's really sick or they're not feeling great. But part of our job is that connection, and I'm so glad I can see your eyes, and you've got just beautiful eyes and a beautiful smile, and some of that tells us that we're safe. So
Yes.
in this online world, just searching for that connection, searching for that. If I was with you in the room, we probably would have ended this, by hugging, but we
Yes.
can't do that. At the moment, it's probably not great for health protocols to hug a complete stranger. But I think that just that desire for, I can see your eyes, and our brains are probably going through some kind of a process of saying, I need to find new cues, to tell me that I'm connected with you, that you're safe, that you're on my side, that part of my ex people.
Yes, and the more sensory properties we engage, the closer that connection is, right? So if we're in the same room with somebody, if we don't have any visual or auditory disabilities, then we can see that person, we can hear them, whether we realize it or not. Unless again we have a disability, we can smell them, right? And so there's at least three different sensations that are now activated. The more sensory properties are activated, the closer our connection typically is. But it's better to have one than none, right? And so even when people interact with each other purely auditorily, for example, it's still better than nothing. It still brings a sense of connection, but the more senses we can activate, the closer that connection is.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Audience, so the more senses you can activate, the more connection you get. So, Janina, I want to spend a few minutes just talking about, the dragons, and what to do with the dragons within. I often look at the transactional analysis model, and we teach that to people. And I explain to people, I just happen to grow up with, two very critical parents, and a lot of my inner voice is very critical. That's how I motivate myself. I typically would not talk to myself and say to myself, "Oh, Chantel, well done. How about doing better next time?" I would go, "You're not fast enough. You're not clever enough." So a lot of that internal narrative is quite, you know, it's exhausting to listen to my
Yes.
to my inner voice, and I have to like really have some practices in place to like keep it quiet, and it's noisy. It's a heck of a noisy in my head. So, let's just talk about, it's kind of slaying these dragons. You talk about slaying the dragons, I talk about the bitch inside,
Yeah.
it just goes nee 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 nee.
Well, there are a few things about it. One I think is developing compassion for ourselves for having these dragons. And the other one, that's going to sound weird, is developing compassion for the dragons. So I want to start with talking about compassion for ourselves. And Kristen Neff is one of the, no, really the top researcher and author on self-compassion. I highly recommend all her work and all her books. But really, I think a lot of times when, let's say, we're struggling to get out of bed in the morning, or we're struggling to motivate ourselves to work out or to do our work, we blame ourselves for struggling. But if we think about that for a moment, it doesn't make any sense, right? We're kicking ourselves when we're down. And so I like to create this metaphor that anytime you're struggling, you're really a dragon fighter. You're fighting a dragon, right? So if you're trying to slay five dragons with one hand and you're trying to do your report with another hand, I mean, if I was watching a movie of somebody doing that, I would say, wow, that is impressive that that person is fighting five dragons with one hand and still trying to do their school or their work report with another. I wouldn't expect that report to be pristine, right? I would just be impressed that they're doing it. And
Yeah.
the truth is, that's what we do every day, right? Most of us, that's how we function. We're slaying a bunch of dragons as we're trying to do our work, but then we beat ourselves up if it takes us a little bit longer or if we've made a typo or something like that. But the truth is, the mere fact that you're showing up while you're facing all of these dragons, that's already amazing, right? So I actually think if anything, it's praiseworthy, right? That you're showing up and you're doing it. So I think having some compassion for ourselves in that regard is important. The other thing I like to address is having compassion for the dragons themselves. A lot of times we might try to either believe them, right, that we're awful, or try to shun them away. But the truth is, the dragons often represent a small, scared child inside of us that's trying to do everything to appease everybody else, to avoid the critical parents, for example. And so, if we think about what is this dragon trying to protect me from? Is it trying to maybe tell me all these awful things so that I don't look foolish in front of my parents or other critics, right? Other external people? Then maybe we can think about this dragon as benevolent, but maybe not very skillful in how they're trying to protect us, how they're trying to encourage us. And so maybe we can consider maybe befriending that dragon and saying, hey, I get it. I know you're scared. And I appreciate you looking out for me, but we've got this. It's okay. So we can almost over time become a parent to that dragon. And what's really interesting is that after a while, the dragon becomes smaller. So we can almost like cuddle the dragon and soothe the dragon and support the dragon. And all the while, then remembering what our work is for and that it doesn't have to be perfect.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I can see myself journaling for the next few days just on, what I think asking that powerful question, what is the dragon trying to protect me from? And more embracing it. As I'm listening to you, I think some of my awareness, and I'm actually quite deeply touched by this. Some of my awareness is that, these internal voices are so loud, and if something from the outside, you know, criticizes me or I get feedback, then they gang up. And it's like my inner bully and my outer bullies, they all having a bit of a party here. And I find myself constantly like, moving around in the drama triangle. I want to be the hero, but I'm the victim. And then, when my energy is completely depleted, I turn into the villain and I lose my shit. And often,
Mhm.
I lose my shit with the people closest to me, my kids and my kids and my husband. They get the last bit of the day, and by the end of the day there's probably not a lot left because I've had this internal dragon slaying going on all day long.
Yeah. And not only are we the victim, we're also the victim and the perpetrator at the same time,
Yeah, yeah,
right? And it becomes this really vicious cycle. And you're right, it's the people closest to us that end up getting hurt as a result, because oftentimes we, without realizing it, see the people closest to us as an extension of ourselves. So as a part of self-punishment, we lash out on the extensions of ourselves. But
yeah.
usually we're a lot kinder to strangers, to neighbors, right? Yeah. Even if we're in
Absolutely.
that moment losing our shit, as you say, right? And then a neighbor comes by, we put it together, right? We tend to be
Sometimes
very
my kids
polite.
frown. They go like, "What just happened? Where was
Yeah.
the person who was here moments ago?"
Like what just happened? Exactly. Exactly. And so I think that we weren't taught, many of us, to recognize, wait a minute, notice that anger that you have with yourself, that shame, and notice what's behind it. Like, let's peel back that curtain because behind it is fear and pain.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
if we can sit with that,
yeah.
if we can parent that, then we're going to have a very different reaction to ourselves and to the people around us.
Yeah, I was in a class earlier this week, Janina, and someone said something incredibly powerful about emotions. We tend to judge emotions, and this person said, "If no emotion is ever negative in the right dosage. It's about the dosage." You know, if you have a lot of fear, if you have a lot of anger, then, that's going to be toxic to your life. If you have, an overflow of joy and you take no responsibility and you just desire more pleasure and joy, that's also got its downside. So I think you're so right in, finding that balance.
And I think I think you're right in that no emotion is bad. I think every emotion is good and helpful. And I think that there's a difference between emotion and action.
Yeah.
And so, whatever emotion we feel, whether it's joy, whether it's anger, whether it's jealousy, whether it's, fear, insecurity, they're all important. They're all telling us about something we need, but it's how we respond. We can be angry because maybe we're being wronged, or maybe our children or our loved ones are being wronged. And that anger is important because then it will push us to take an action to protect ourselves or to protect our loved ones. But just because we're angry doesn't mean we have to be violent or aggressive, right? And so if we can sit back and watch that emotion with curiosity, and maybe again treat it like a small scared child, like a baby dragon, right? And ask it like, hey, what's going on, right? What are you feeling right now? What do you need? A lot of times we'll realize that we need safety, reassurance, maybe a break, right? Because maybe we've been working too much, or being too hard on ourselves. And if we can offer that to ourselves, then, that's where soothing happens. And so if we look at emotions as information, then we can have a very different relationship with them and with ourselves.
Sure, that's incredible. So I love steps and recipes. So let's just see. So for people listening to this that might be, sitting in a job or a relationship or a life that they know they kind of stuck. They're stuck in this um, potentially loneliness, potentially just feeling unsuccessful, feeling like a failure, and they listen to this and they go, I want to find my superhero. Like I want to
Mhm.
find my superhero and I want to develop a way to work with my dragons, to train my how to train my dragons. What advice do you have for people?
Wow, great question, because my mind is going on all these different directions, and I think that I might offer slightly different exercises for different people in different situations. There's one that I like to use, and this is channeling our inner hero. And so I invite a particular person to think about a personal hero. So this could be a real life person, even if they're no longer alive, like a grandparent, for example, a teacher. It could be maybe an athlete, a celebrity, even if we never met them. It could be a historical or religious figure. Or it could be a fictional character like Batman or Dumbledore or Wonder Woman, right? And so the idea would be that if we have maybe 10 minutes alone with our hero, so our hero comes over, we spend time together, and the hero knows exactly what you've been through. The hero knows your origin story, your inner critic, your inner dragons, right? All your hopes and aspirations and passions. And your hero has the most encouraging and loving words of wisdom for you. What would your hero say? And so I encourage people to really reflect on that. And we might want to talk to a different hero at different points and write out their message. Because I imagine a lot of times the hero might remind you that you're already making a difference, that you might not realize just how many people you've affected positively through your kindness, because people might not think to tell you this, right? People might not think to express their gratitude, but you're helping and inspiring people every day. And maybe a reminder that everything you do matters, so that whether you're in a situation you like or a situation you don't like, even if you're not in a place where you can change the situation quite yet, there's still things you can do to make other people's lives better, to make your mark in this world. You already have, and you will continue to do so.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Thank you for giving us that gift of a tool to use. Now, I have a couple of interesting questions for you that we're going to end off with. So, tell us a little bit. I believe Gail Simon named a character after you. Tell us a little bit about that. I'm curious.
Oh my gosh. I I honestly didn't believe it, and I still don't. I have the graphic novel, I read it, but I'm still in a place of disbelief. You know, she's one of my biggest heroes. And at one point, she emailed me and she said, "Hey, would it be okay if I base a character on you?" And I said, "Sure." And I honestly thought that she was joking or maybe just thinking about it, but I was like, "There's no way." My imposter syndrome said, like, "There's no way." She probably forgot all about it. And then maybe a year later, I posted on Twitter about my imposter syndrome and, just trying to be open, inviting people to share theirs and saying, "Hey, here's my imposter syndrome. I'm not a real writer and I'm not a real therapist. I'm not." And then she replied, "You are real, you are helpful, and I named a character after you." And I was like, "Wait, wait, wait, wait. Like, you actually did that? That actually happened? What's happening?" And then it came out, and I have the graphic novel, and I open it, and on the first page there is a redheaded therapist who introduces herself as Dr. Janina Scarlet, and I was like, wait, wait, what is happening? Um, yeah, I'm still in disbelief, and Gail is one of my favorite people in the world, and I still can't believe that happened.
Oh, wow. Wow. And I'm so grateful for the acknowledgement. Oh, that is just incredible. So, on a lighter note, you're in a superhero. What are the most favorite unhealthy snack to snack on?
Unhealthy snack?
Yeah.
Um, does it have to be a solid food? Because my
Please.
favorite unhealthy snack is coffee. I have a little bit of a caffeine addiction, and by little, I mean a lot. They say you could bring one thing with you on a stranded island. I would bring coffee, just all the coffee in the world. So,
Oh,
yeah,
that is so incredibly cool. Janina, so tell us, if people have enjoyed listening to you as much as what I have, what are the ways that we can follow you? What are the ways we can use to stay in touch with you? And is there anything that you need that we can help you with?
great question. Thank you. Always happy to interact. I'm on social media. If you look for Janina Scarlet, you can probably find me just about anywhere. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Those are the main ones. And honestly, the best way that I'm hoping people can help is that if you're interested in any of it, if there's a book you're interested in reading, after you read it, give it to a friend, because I think that there are a lot of people that might be able to use some kind of a support. And it doesn't have to be my book, just any book. If you read a book and you found it helpful, give it to somebody else and start a conversation, right? Talk about mental health, because I think the more we talk about it, the more we heal. It's not about going through a hard time, it's about having someone go through a hard time with. We can get through just about anything if we have a supportive person. So the best way anyone can help me is by spreading word about mental health, sharing books on mental health. Really, that's my main ask.
That's a really great idea. That's a really great idea about the books. Janina, and tell us, training, workshops, your superhero therapy, how does that work? Is that something that, people can sign up for? How can we get more? I think just You've got a beautiful soul and an amazing heart, and I'm almost having separation anxiety here just to know that I've got to say goodbye to you
Oh,
in a few moments. How can we get more of you?
you're so sweet. Thank you. So on my website, superhero-therapy.com, I have a page called trainings and it lists the trainings that I have coming up. And so anybody can sign up. People can also request trainings for their organizations or schools. Yeah, so that's probably the easiest way to either sign up for a training I'm already offering or to request one.
Oh, that is amazing. And folks, will put some links into the podcast description so that you can get in touch with Janina. Janina, so thank you, thank you, thank you. I've loved having this discussion with you. Just personally, my takeaways, I'm gonna definitely put some of what you've suggested in action. I'm gonna journal. I'm gonna see what my dragons are telling me, and I'm definitely gonna book in my calendar. I'm gonna book a conversation with some kind of a superhero and ask them, what wisdom they have for me. So a lot of blessings on your work, and thank you for, having some of these hard conversations. And, thank you for the 3-year-old Janina that decided to carry on, and the 12-year-old Janina that, faced the bullies. And just thank you for, all of your work that you so generously share with people.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me on. Thank you for having such an amazing podcast where people can be a part of this world, a part of, all of your guests' world and your world. And thank you for all of your kindness. Thank you for being wonderful.
And thank you, folks. So that is the Brand Warrior Revolution podcast today, and watch out for the next episode.